The first time I saw Ikenna cry, I knew things had gone bad, really bad. This was a guy who never showed weakness, the kind who walked through problems like they were puddles in the street, just step over them and keep moving. But that evening, in the back of Mama Ife's shop, with his head in his hands, Ikenna was shaking. "I'm finished," he muttered. His voice was rough, like someone had dragged sandpaper across his throat. I pulled up a plastic chair and sat next to him. "What happened?" He let out a bitter laugh. "You won't believe it." I waited. "You know the money I borrowed?" he asked. Of course I knew. Everybody did. He had taken a loan from some guys in town to start his phone repair business. It was supposed to be a smart move. Ikenna was good with phones, better than most technicians who just poked around and hoped for the best. He had even rented a small shop, painted the walls bright blue, and put up a sign, "iTech, we fix, you smile." It was supposed to be the beginning of something great. But now sitting here, he looked like a man on the edge. "They want their money back," he continued. "All of it. By Friday." I frowned. "But I thought they gave you 2 months." "They changed their mind." Typical. These weren't bank loans. These were the type of guys who smiled when they gave you money and frowned when they came to collect. If you didn't pay, they took something else. Your shop, your peace, maybe even a few of your bones. "How much do you have now?" I asked. Ikenna shook his head. "Nothing." That's when I knew this wasn't just bad. It was dangerous. The twist. The next morning, Ikenna's shop was gone. Not the building, but everything inside. His tools, the second-hand phones he was fixing, even his little plastic chair. The door was hanging open like a mouth mid-yawn. "They came last night," he told me, his face blank. "Cleared everything." I felt sick. "Did they?" He nodded before I could finish. "They said if I don't bring their money by Friday, they'll come for me next." We both knew what that meant. But then something happened that none of us expected. The same customers Ikenna had been helping, students with cracked screens, traders with stubborn batteries, even Mama Hefe, whose keypad phone had survived more falls than a cat, came together. Someone spread the word, and by evening, people were gathering at his empty shop. "Ikenna has helped us. Now we help him." That's how the money started coming in, small amounts. 100 naira here, 500 there. A man from the next street donated his old tools. Someone else brought in a used display cabinet. By Thursday evening, Ikenna had enough to pay back most of the loan. He walked straight to the lenders, handed them the cash and said, "That's all you're getting." They weren't happy, but they took it. A month later, Tech was back. This time, bigger. Because now, Ikenna wasn't just some guy fixing phones. He was the guy the whole community had stood up for. And that kind of loyalty, you can't buy it. I still think about that week, about how close Ikenna came to losing everything. But mostly, I think about how in this life, the people you help might just be the ones who save you. A few months after that madness, Ikenna was doing better than ever. His shop was always full, students arguing over who was next, traders dropping off their battered phones, and even some big men who didn't want to admit they came to a roadside repair guy instead of an expensive store. But trouble has a way of finding people like Ikenna. One evening, just as he was closing up, 2 men walked in. Not customers. These ones had a different kind of energy, the kind that made the air feel heavier. One was tall and thin, with a scar running from his eyebrow to his cheek. The other was stocky, with a wristwatch too big for his arm. "We need to talk," Scarface said, locking the door behind him. Ikenna glanced at me. I had been helping him that day, and I could tell he was calculating. Run, fight, pretend not to understand. Stocky spoke next. We heard you got money quick, too quick. So we are thinking maybe you owe us extra. That's when it hit me. These weren't the same guys he borrowed from. These were new vultures, smelling an easy target. Ikenna took a deep breath. I don't owe you anything. Scarface smiled, and somehow that was worse than a frown. You don't, but you will. We'll be back in a week. Find something for us. With that, they left. Just like that. No shouting, no breaking things. Just a calm promise that sat in the air like smoke. The fight back. For the first time in months, I saw real fear in Ikenna's eyes. Not the I might lose my business kind of fear. The I might not wake up tomorrow kind. But fear didn't last long in him. By morning, he had a plan. He went straight to Chief Okafor, the old man who ran half the market. A powerful man, the kind you didn't cross. I need help. The chief listened, Ikenna told nodded, and made one phone call. That was it. A week later, Scarface and Stocky showed up again, but this time they weren't smiling. Behind them, 2 police officers were waiting. You again? One officer said, shaking his head. How many times will we arrest you? Ikenna and I just watched as they were taken away, their protest drowned by the chief's quiet authority. That night, as we locked up the shop, I asked Ikenna, how did you know Chief would help? He grinned. I fixed his daughter's phone last month. For free. We both laughed. Sometimes survival isn't just about money or strength. It's about the people you stand by. Because when the time comes, the right people will stand by you too. The night they came for Ikenna, I was there. It was late, past 11, and most of the shops in the market had closed. I was helping him count the day's money when we heard footsteps outside, heavy, deliberate. Then a sharp knock. Ikenna gave me a look. That kind of look that says, get ready. When he opened the door, 3 men stood there. I recognized them immediately. Odogwu and his boys, loan sharks. Not the type that sent reminders, the type that sent warnings. Odogwu stepped inside like he owned the place. Ikenna, he said, dragging out the name. You owe us. Ikenna folded his arms. I paid you back. Odogwu smiled, the kind of smile that made your stomach tighten. With whose permission? Ikenna exhaled. Debt is debt. I settled it. Not when it's my money, Odogwu said. You see, I was counting on that interest. And now I feel disrespected. I knew where this was going. They weren't here for money. They were here to make an example out of Ikenna. Odogwu flicked his fingers. The 2 guys behind him stepped forward. You have one more chance, he said. Pay what we say, or... That's when the first punch landed. Not from them, from Ikenna. The room exploded into chaos. Ikenna's punch sent one of the guys stumbling, but the other grabbed him by the shirt, slamming him against the table. I jumped in, swinging a stool at the second guy's back. It cracked, but not enough to stop him. Odogwu just stood there, watching, smiling like he was enjoying a show. Ikenna struggled, throwing elbows, kicking, trying to break free. I managed to push one guy off him and we both ran. Out the back door, into the dark alley behind the shop. They chased us. The market at night is a maze, narrow paths, locked stalls, shadows that play tricks on your eyes. We ran without thinking, turning corners blindly. Then I heard Ikenna grunt. I turned. One of them had caught up, grabbing his shirt. Ikenna twisted, punched him in the throat, and we kept running. By the time we reached the main road, breathless, shaking, they had fallen back. Maybe they got tired. Maybe they didn't want to make a scene where the police could pass. Either way, we didn't wait to find out. We ran straight to Chief Okafor's house. Chief Okafor was an old man, but in this town, his words carried weight. He listened, nodded, and made one phone call. The next morning, police picked up Odogwu and his boys, not for attacking Ikenna, for something bigger: extortion, assault, even armed robbery. Turns out, Chief had been waiting for an excuse to deal with them. Ikenna got his shop back, his peace. But something changed in him that night. He wasn't just the guy who fixed phones anymore. He was the guy who fought back. And me? I learned something important. In this life, trouble will always come. But sometimes, if you stand your ground, trouble learns to be afraid of you. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. Ikenna went back to his shop, fixing phones like nothing had happened. But I knew him too well. It wasn't the same. He checked over his shoulder more. He locked his door earlier. And sometimes, when a customer entered too quickly, his hand twitched like he was ready for a fight. Then one evening, I noticed a car parked across the street. A black Toyota Camry, tinted windows, engine running, but no one coming out. I nudged Ikenna. "You see that car?" He didn't even look, just nodded. "They've been there since morning." I swallowed. "You think it's—" "Yes." Odogwu and his boys were in police custody, but people like them always had bigger people behind them. People who didn't like losing money. Ikenna's shop was full of customers that day, but my mind was somewhere else. Watching, waiting. It happened faster than I expected. The moment the last customer left, two men stepped out of the Camry. One tall and lean, the other shorter but wide like a wrestler. They didn't rush. They just crossed the road slowly, like they had all the time in the world. Ikenna stood up before they even entered. "Close the door," he said. I did. But it was useless. The taller guy knocked once, twice, then pushed the door open himself. "We need to talk," he said, voice calm but sharp. "You made a mistake, Ikenna." Ikenna didn't answer. He just folded his arms. The shorter one stepped forward. "Do you know who Odogwu works for?" Silence. "You think this is over because the police took him?" The tall one shook his head. "It's bigger than that. And now, you owe us." Ikenna let out a slow breath. "I don't owe anybody." They laughed. Not the funny kind, the dangerous kind. The short one pulled out a folded paper and threw it on the counter. 2 million naira, 1 week. I picked up the paper. It wasn't just numbers. It had Ikenna's full name, his address, even a note about his younger sister in school, a threat. Ikenna took the paper, folded it neatly, and put it in his pocket. "Leave my shop." The tall one smiled. "We'll see you soon." Then they left, as slowly as they came. That night, Ikenna didn't go home. We sat in the shop, thinking, planning. 2 million in a week. Impossible. Fighting them, suicide, running, even worse. Then, Ikenna looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "Let's stop playing defense." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward. "We're going after them first." I felt my chest tighten. "Are you mad?" But he wasn't joking. He had a plan, and if we pulled it off, this wouldn't just be the end of our troubles. It would be the end of theirs. I didn't sleep that night. Ikenna's words kept replaying in my head. "We're going after them first." Was he crazy? These weren't street thugs you could just fight and win. They had money, power, and connections. One wrong move, and we'd disappear like smoke. But when morning came, I followed him anyway. First stop, Chief Okafor's house. The old man listened as Ikenna explained everything. The threats, the 2 million demand, the way they knew everything about his family. Chief sat in silence, rubbing his chin. Then he asked one question. "Do you trust me?" Ikenna nodded without hesitation. I hesitated, but only for a second. Chief made 2 phone calls. One to someone he called DPO, the second to a man whose name I didn't catch. But the way he spoke, slow and firm, made me uneasy. By afternoon, we had instructions. Go to your shop, act normal, they will come. That was it. No explanations, no backup plan. Just wait. Ikenna and I returned to the shop, pretending everything was fine. But inside, my stomach was twisting itself into knots. Then right before closing, the black Camry returned. The same 2 men walked in, tall and short. This time, they didn't waste time. Have our money? Short asked, rubbing his hands like he already knew the answer. Ikenna leaned against the counter. Calm. I don't owe you 2 million, Tall scoffed. Then we take something else. He gestured toward the door. Come with us. My heart slammed against my chest. This was it. Ikenna shrugged. Let's go then. They weren't expecting that. Short frowned. No wahala. We'll settle this outside. As soon as they turned to leave, Ikenna nodded at me. The signal. I reached under the counter and pressed send on my phone. We followed them outside. The street was almost empty. Just 1 or 2 traders locking up. The car door opened. Then before they could push Ikenna inside, another car pulled up. A police car. Chief Okafor wasn't playing. 4 officers jumped out. Don't move. Everything happened fast. Tall and Short tried to run. One officer grabbed Short by the neck, slamming him against the car. The other aimed a gun at Tall's back. I said don't move. Odogwu's men were caught red-handed. Turns out, Chief's mysterious second call was to someone high up in the state's security force. These guys weren't just threatening Ikenna. They were linked to multiple extortion cases, illegal debt collection, even a kidnapping. And just like that, it was over. A week later, the news spread. Odogwu's boss had been arrested, along with half his gang. The streets were buzzing. For the first time, people weren't afraid to talk. Ikenna's shop, business was booming. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, buy from him, even bring him free food. He wasn't just the guy who fixed phones anymore. He was the guy who refused to be broken. That night, as we sat outside, I asked him, "Did you ever think we were finished?" He smiled. Every second of it. I laughed. So why didn't you run? His answer stayed with me. If you keep running, you'll always be running. One day, you have to turn and fight. And that's exactly what we did. The end,